how do managers then translate that information when they get their scores back? The piece is that the individual score is just a number.
Yeah.
It's just a number, like whatever. It's, a 4.5 or a 6.8 or whatever the number was. The key is it's a starting point of a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It allows them a place to start and sit down with their team. And
What would your advice be to some of these young leaders getting into those roles and they have to deal with a mixed union as well? Good afternoon and welcome to the RK Leadership Podcast, where we help empower tomorrow's leaders through the sharing of knowledge, experience, and inspiring stories. I'm your host, Rob Cameronpour, and my very special guest today is Matthew Devine. And Matthew is the founder of the Matthew Devine Leadership Coaching. He's held several positions at Hydro One. Some of them include talent acquisition manager and recruitment manager. And he's also been a talent acquisition manager at McCain Foods and a few other jobs that I won't get into, Matthew. But I want to say thank you for being with me today. I greatly appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure.
Awesome. So why don't we get right into it?
Sure.
Ready to go?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So Matthew, can you walk us through your journey and tell us about some of the challenges that you faced along the way and how you ended up here today?
So for me, as you said, I started at Hydro One. It was in a human resources role. But what I found interesting during this role is I was often in a position where I was working with people who were developing themselves. Start off with students, hiring new grads into the organization. But as I progressed through the career, I started to work with managers more directly. And then that led to informally coaching managers along the side. It would just be something I was doing because I wanted to be supportive. And then promoted into leadership roles, had my own team, worked with my own team, saw value in developing a coaching skill. So I took coach training for that. Never with the expectation of becoming a coach myself, even though that's where I ended up, but with the idea of how do I become a better manager? And that helped me work with people even more effectively. Moved away from Hydro One, as you said, to the stint at McCain Foods, which was interesting, moving from a public sector organization to a private sector organization.
Right, yes.
Very different perspective, a provincial focus to a global focus. Again, expanded my perspective on working with different people in different countries, working remotely for most of my job, which ended up being very useful when the pandemic hit. But after my time at McCain, I realized there was an opportunity for me to do something different. I'd been in talent acquisition, the recruiting role for quite a while, but I wanted to get back into training. I'd been doing training for my entire life.
Nice.
And so signed up to do leadership, learning and development and training courses. And then the pandemic hit right at the same time. So all of my courses were all remote, and then completed that, moved on to another role where I focused on learning and development and also with a bigger focus on change management as well.
Nice.
So getting into the idea of how do we manage change in an organization, which, we look at a larger organization, but it's the same thing when we think about ourselves. How do we manage change in ourselves? What are the resistance do we as individuals have to navigating change? And these concepts were all just kind of being woven into my psyche at the time. And then realized after a couple of years doing project work with a new company, I worked with another utility, decided I needed to do more. I recognized that to get to the kind of role that I wanted would involve a lot of lateral steps and jumping through hoops and so forth. And I felt, I could do more. I can do more. And I stepped away from the other organization I was working with and started working on developing my own private practice with coaching.
Amazing.
So hopefully that gives you an overview of where I got to and where I'm at, and why am I here today is a chance to talk about what are my philosophies when it comes to leadership, and what are the things that I think are important for us to take into consideration.
Awesome. No, that's great, and that's quite a journey that you've been through. So again, one of the things that you talked about is, you worked at a utility, which was, a public sector, now going into private, with a global organization. Can you talk to us about what challenges were similar in terms of leadership that you saw in both sectors? That's kind of, all around when you moved from place to place, you saw the same kind of trend within the leaders and the issues that they were having.
I would bring this down to one issue, which is expectations, setting expectations.
Yes.
And that these are the issues that were common between the organizations. At Hydro One, being clear with my team, working with my individuals, setting up expectations as to what's coming. Because we would have a new government get elected, and that inevitably would mean a new minister of energy, which mean changes into the organization itself, and that often would cause uncertainty with my team members and uncertainty in the organization. So navigating those sorts of changes and setting the expectations and being in a role where I could set the expectations to my team so that they could feel more reassured was really important. But this was also important at McCain as well. When I was working at McCain Foods, the project I was on was a large HR transformation project. We were implementing new technology at the same time, but they were restructuring their entire global HR function. And we had to make sure that the employees who were based in England and the ones who were based in Colombia and the ones that were based in China or Australia, that they were all feeling like, okay, we understand what's happening. We understand what are the steps that are going to be changing. We understand what is the technology, and part of that's going to be training. But there was a lot of time spent setting up expectations, letting them know what the next step was, what the end goal was, what the end state would be. And this idea of setting expectations, I think, is critical in making sure that people feel like they are safe in their job, that they can see what's coming, and so they can anticipate it, they can think about it, they have an opportunity to ask questions, which then encourages good conversations. And if you're listening, you can build that trust with the employees.
Absolutely. So you talked about expectations, which is huge for me, and I always do this exercise with my team. But I also say expectations is both ways. So just as I'm giving them expectations, I expect them to give me expectations for me. Right? Because it's a bilateral kind of communication, and that's how you build the trust as well. So what are your thoughts around that?
I don't like the idea of one-way leadership either. You can come in with a command and control perspective. Like, that is a leadership model, but it doesn't build that trust.
That's right.
And trust comes from listening as well. The leader has to listen to what their people are talking about. If they're not hearing what are the issues that are coming up, if they're not processing the kinds of feedback, then the employee's not going to feel like their opinions matter, which means that they don't matter. And if they don't feel like they matter on the job, why do they care? Why are they even doing the job that they're doing if they don't care? So as the leader, it's really important to create that space, create that openness so that you can hear information coming at you. Sometimes you can do it actively. Certainly asking direct questions. I'm making a decision about this. What do you think? And actively engaging them. But it's also sometimes important just simply to, be witness to the sorts of things that they bring up. If they're complaining about a particular issue, okay, let's hear more about that. What else? Tell me more. And getting that feedback might give you clues as to what's going on in you as the leader.
That's right. That's right. So one of the aspects of that also is, Matthew, difficult conversations. Now, this is something a lot of people, in my opinion, struggle with because there's a lot of fear that's associated with difficult conversations. Again, I always say that difficult conversations is something that you create in your head because you don't know the outcome of the conversation, yet you're going in there, you've got your guard up or whatnot, and you're defensive. So what are your thoughts, again, from being in that HR perspective, coaching, new leaders? What is your advice to the young leaders, and how do they tackle these difficult conversations?
There's two thoughts I have on this. Well, one thought is a little bit more detailed than the other. It depends on, is the difficult conversation suddenly put upon you versus do you as a leader anticipate an upcoming difficult conversation,
Yes.
that you know that you're going to have words with your employee, and how you handle those situations is different.
That's right.
If it's put upon you as a surprise, you're in your office or whatever, an employee comes in and they start yelling at you or whatever, that can be a really difficult situation. The key in that moment, I think, is to be curious, is to recognize this person's sharing a lot of information. They're obviously really upset about something, and this is a chance for you to learn more. Going in and suddenly getting your defenses up will only reinforce what the other person is expecting of you. They're expecting a fight.
Yes.
And if you demonstrate that you are willing to fight them, they will continue to fight you. But if you are, slow down your speech, lower your volume, and ask questions. Don't try to explain, don't try to answer, try to get as much information. Make sure that you are listening to them and hearing them.
Yes.
And getting a clear picture of what's going on. And even after they've said their grievance, usually there's some other thing going under it. It's useful to keep digging a little bit further, just to see if there's anything else under there that is the real issue.
That's right. Yes.
And that's what I'd recommend in a moment where you don't have any time to prepare, is to calm down, cool down, slow down, and listen. Now, if you have time, if you are going to have a difficult conversation, maybe it's a performance management issue you're dealing with, maybe you have to terminate somebody, some kind of serious conversation, but you have time to prepare, then you have a little bit more opportunity to think about, all right, what are the possible issues that the other employee might have?
That's right.
What are the possible outcomes that might take place? And think about things like, are they going to yell at you? Are they going to cry? Are they going to, sulk and go quiet? And think about, okay, if those things happen, how do I want to respond in those moments? And you may choose to do different things. It still comes back to giving time, giving space, listening, asking questions. But also realize there's a mindset to this as well. There can be often a fear of, I want to avoid having this conversation because I don't want to upset upset them. I don't want to feel upset. But recognizing that not acting can often lead to worse results.
Absolutely.
So recognizing that there's value in having that difficult conversation, but taking that time to prepare and anticipate what some of the responses are, so you can be more, I was going to say not reactive, but be more responsive in the moment when they are demonstrating certain behaviors.
That's right. No, those are great points, Matthew, that you pointed out. Listening is a huge, it's one of the most important things. As a leader, you want to listen to your people, and they want to feel like they're heard.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the second aspect is if you've got time to prepare, make sure you got your facts and figures before you go into that meeting. Right.
100%.
So no, that's great advice. The other thing I wanted to talk about with respect to leadership, again, your perspective, again, with an HR lens. Now, we both worked at Hydro One, so you're aware of the Q12, which was the engagement surveys that we had.
Absolutely.
I found those to be really useful. Personally speaking, I think it's a great tool to get proper feedback from your team. However, you have to do something with it, or it becomes useless. And I think that's what some people would see. What are your thoughts on the engagement surveys? How leaders should, measure engagement in the various organizations, and how do they make those improvements to engagement?
I have lots of thoughts about the Gallup survey. So Gallup had the advantage that their survey was done globally across, hundreds of organizations, thousands of employees across the world. So they have an absolute massive amount of data backing up the various questions they have as part of their survey, and why those questions are worded to get the information they needed out of them.
That's right.
I also felt that the survey was really valuable to underline key pieces of information about, are we as leaders providing feedback to our employees? Do they have the tools that they need? But also understanding from a cultural perspective, one of the most interesting questions was, do you have a best friend at work? And that this question was so critical because it actually was tied to safety. If people felt like they had a best friend, and how you define that was obviously a discussion point, but if they felt they had friends they could trust on and they could go to, then they were going to be in a more safe environment. They felt like they had somebody who was watching their back.
Absolutely.
And for an organization like Hydro One, where it's a utility, safety is obviously extremely important for the organization. This question was really valuable. Now, how do managers then translate that information when they get their scores back? The piece is that the individual score is just a number.
Yeah.
It's just a number, like whatever. It's, a 4.5 or a 6.8 or whatever the number was. The key is it's a starting point of a conversation. It allows them a place to start and sit down with their team and say, hey, here's some information. What do you think?
Yeah.
And start listening, start getting that feedback and learning what is important to them. Because they may look at that and say, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. But the opportunity to then look at, all right, well, is there one of these questions, one of these scores on this engagement survey that we want to get better at? And if you're able to work together on raising one of these up, then it can give you the opportunity to raise all of them up, because the kinds of things that you're talking about are going to be affecting multiple areas of their employment.
That's right. Absolutely. So in your opinion, Matt, what is one of the areas of concern when it comes to engagement? What are leaders not doing?
The quippy answer is they're not engaging. What are they not doing? They are not engaging their team in listening. To be honest, it really comes down to, they look at this number and they think it's some kind of data output from a machine, without realizing that they need to actually be having the conversations with their people. And it's not a one-time thing. We did the Gallup survey. It was once a year they did the survey, and it was a big production to get it done. But the engagement isn't just a once that happens once when the survey comes out. It's happens every single day in every single interaction you have with the employee. It's those conversations, which could be just as simple as, hey, are you doing okay today? Do you need anything? Or, you're doing well. Is there anything we could do to help you be even better? Like,
that's right.
Can we, is there a course that we can get you involved in? Or I was thinking about giving you this opportunity to try expanding your skills. What do you think? And having those conversations, not once, not twice, not only when they're having a performance evaluation meeting, but every day. That's the thing that I think a lot of managers miss. And the successful ones, the best managers, are doing that unconsciously. They're doing that every time they talk to their employees.
Unconsciously. I like that. Because it's built into you. It becomes like the second nature for you, right? So it's very important. Good. I really like that. And I think, engagement is super important in any organization. And I think there's definitely a correlation between engagement and, your productivity, your bottom line. So
can I give you an example, actually?
Sure, absolutely.
So I had an employee.
Yep.
She made a mistake. We were in recruiting, so we were posting jobs. She was working with the HR consultant on a particular job. They were working very closely with the union. So there's some very political stuff related to this particular role. The HR consultant gave the green light to post the job. So she posted the job on the website. Apparently, it wasn't going out at the right time. The union exploded. They got on the phone. They were yelling at her. They were threatening grievances. My poor employee is panicking. She thinks her job is over. She, she's junior. She doesn't know what's going on. And when it comes to engagement, I recognize that this was a moment that I could not only help support her, but I could also help support the rest of the team. So I went over and spoke with her. I'm familiar with how this works. So I talked her down, calmed her down, learned a little bit more about the situation, understood the context a little bit better, recognized that the HR consultant made a mistake, and that led to all of this. But having that conversation with my employee, talking about how we were going to work together, we were going to solve that. She's got my back. She's not going to lose her job. I made sure I did that within earshot of the rest of my team, because it was important for me not only to reassure this individual, but communicate to everybody else around me that my approach to leadership was going to be supportive. I wanted them to get the same message, even though they were not involved in this situation at all. They didn't have any input. They weren't going to be involved in the solution. But I wanted to make sure that they could hear that if something goes wrong, Matthew is going to be there for them. And that, I think, is I pull that as an example of how you can be engaged, even in a difficult situation, in a difficult conversation, to engage not one person, but multiple people.
Well, that's a great example, and thank you for bringing that up. It was a great segue to my next question for you. So you've worked in a unionized environment, and I want you to share with us what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced, and what did you learn from them?
Biggest challenges working with the union?
Within a union environment.
Okay. Working in a union environment has the challenge of that you have a structure of rules of what kind of behavior, what kind of things are allowed or not allowed. And in Hydro, we had two major unions. We had, professional union for the engineers. We had a union for the trades and field staff. For me, the challenge was the balance between how do we, as an organization, from management's perspective, how do we execute on our job and our work programs, realizing that sometimes that ran up against the agreed upon rules that had been set aside in the collective agreements. That's often where the conflict came in, is the expectations between what management wanted and what the union wanted. And so negotiating, again, getting to those expectations and good, clear communication became really critical to get things sorted out. And I found when I was working with the union, because I often worked with them because we were hiring people and there was concerns around how people were hired from different unions' perspectives, is having those healthy relationships with the union representatives, making sure that they knew that I was there to help solve problems and that they were part of that solution. And I saw them as being part of the solution. And that helped create a healthier working environment. It even led to me getting a change made to one of the collective agreements to help smooth something over. But that didn't happen unless there was good communication and good collaboration between myself and the union. But that's where the conflict would often happen. And when the biggest difficulties happened was when management often, and I'm going to point at us because we were often the problem, would try to influence something, and that was going against what the union was trying to do, which was simply create a safe and supportive working environment.
That's right. So which one of these lessons learned do you take today, and do you apply it to your coaching practice?
It comes back to the listening. It's interesting when you're linking it to the coaching practice, because a lot of coaching is around listening to what the issue is that the other person is facing.
That's right.
And as a coach, trying to hear the themes and trying to hear what is not being said when somebody talks to you. And when it comes to working with the union, often there's a political dimension that is not happening at the surface, that's happening behind the scenes between various players. And being aware that that is happening in the background. And for me, where my role, I may not have any, visibility to what those issues are, but listening and trying to pay attention to subtle things like hesitations or coded language, where you realize they are not saying something, they're being very diplomatic in how they say something, realizing, okay, there's a sensitivity in this area. Let's figure out how do we work around it, knowing that there's something over here that they are concerned about, but I can't get into it because they can't get into it. So it really comes down to listening effectively for what is not being said.
Perfect. Now, as you know, there's a lot of young leaders getting into various organizations where there's a union environment, obviously, in different sectors. So what would your advice be to some of these young leaders getting into those roles, and they have to deal with a mixed union as well?
That is definitely a role that would be challenging.
Yes.
To be in a role where you have employees from different unions, possibly even from a non-unionized environment, working alongside each other.
That's right.
I think there's several things that need to happen in that case. One is, and we've spoken about expectations, bringing the team together to set expectations around how are we working together, just simply as people.
Yes.
Just simply as people, like, yeah, we've got these collective agreements. There are all these rules and, hours of work and all that stuff. Yeah, we will talk about that in a minute. But let's start from the place of, what are we trying to do here? What is our overall goal? How do we want to work together? What are the expectations around, communicating with each other? If there's an issue, how do we want to, solve that amongst each other as people? And when does it make sense to raise things up? When does it make sense to work together on it? And if there's disagreement over how things are done, how do we want to navigate through that? So that's how I would recommend starting from. Let's just look at us as people. How are we trying to get together on this? And what is the overall objective? What is the mission? What is the goal here? And then you can start getting into the specifics of what might be different, because there will be employees who will come forward and say, why don't I have the benefit that this other particular employee might be given? And then you have to navigate those conversations, and which, are going to be difficult. And there's not going to be a clear, easy answer to say, well, they happen to have that particular negotiation. Sometimes it's around explaining the structure and explaining here's basically how things work. But what can we do to respect? What do you want in the job? How do I as a manager show up to help ensure that you feel you're respected, that you're engaged at the work, that you are being acknowledged for your accomplishments?
That's right.
Beyond whatever compensation might be different between the employees. So that's how I would approach it. At the same time, looking at the unionized employees who might have certain benefits that the non-unionized employees have as well. Setting expectations with them. This is not something that you want to lord over. We want to work together collectively on this. And how do we ensure that we're not inadvertently creating walls just because they are part of a union and you're not, and the other person is not part of the union? How do we work together? So making sure the expectation is set with both groups and collectively.
Absolutely. And I think you said something very interesting, is just treating people like humans, because we tend to put people in different boxes. And I think you got to take people out of those boxes and just look at them. Hey, like, you're a human being just like this other person. The whatever union you're part of is just an umbrella over, your role. But in the grand scheme of things, you have to treat people like people.
Yeah.
Right?
The thing is that, we're talking about union and non-unionized. The same applies to any kind of differences. You may have people on your team who have 20 years of service, and then you have your brand new co-op student who's got few weeks on the job, and every kind of employee in between then. Or you may have some employees who are new to Canada, new to the country, and they have their own challenges. Maybe English is not their first language, maybe a second language. And then you're dealing with native speakers. There may be any number of kinds of different groups that may exist within your team. And it just comes down to, how do we work together? How do we respect our, the things that we all bring to the table?
That's right. Absolutely. So one of the things that I hear a lot, Matthew, and having my own experience working in various organizations and getting into a leadership role, and I hear this a lot from younger leaders, mid-level leaders. You get thrown into the fire without training, and the training comes after the mat, right? Again, from an HR perspective, you've seen it all. If you were to give advice to organizations in terms of how do you train new leaders in your company, what's the best path to take, or what's the best kind of training to develop? Would you do training prior for them to getting into the role, or do you have them train afterwards? What's your take on that?
Oh my goodness. Because now I'm trying to imagine, if I could design the ideal program, what would it be?
Yes.
Certainly a lot of organizations, and Hydro One was was like this as well. You'd get hired into a management role, and then so many months later, maybe you get brought into some of the more management focused training sessions. And then over a couple of years, you might go through a whole suite of courses, which are great. They speak to, how to do performance management and, gauge those difficult conversations, among other things, all useful skills. But you're right. It's that brand new manager on day one that is entering into a new environment. They don't know what to deal with. If I could create it, I would create a basic onboarding for new managers. And, different organizations are going to have their different structure, but ideally you want to help new managers go through first a mindset shift.
Yes.
Because as an employee, as an individual employee, you are used to working on, I'm given an assignment, I'm going to do the work, I'm going to execute the assignment, then I'm going to go home.
Yes.
Whereas a manager, you're needing to now think about the performance of other people, and that you may have a lot of skill in doing a particular task, but your job is not to do that task. Your job is to motivate and train and guide other people to do that task. And realizing that your influence, your ability, is not so much based on your technical knowledge, although it's important experience and knowledge to have, but you're not going to be your success is not based on your ability to know specific details. Your success is going to be based on your ability to influence and communicate more effectively. And as you move higher in the organization, that influence is going to become more and more important. And the individual technical capabilities become less and less important. So getting in this mindset shift that your approach, your success is going to be about how you bring people together and motivate people. And then this affects things like, how do you delegate work? How do you assign work tasks? How do you determine what's in, what's out? How do you deal with ambiguity? Because, as an employee, things are a lot clearer. Is this task done correctly? Yes or no? Is it right or wrong? It's often much clearer than a manager might be dealing with shades of gray where there's not really a right answer. And you're not going to find a right answer.
That's right.
And having to navigate through those unknowns and recognizing that that's the job.
Yeah.
And I would say the other piece that I would build in would be an opportunity for managers to connect with each other better. Because often people will find that when they move into their first leadership role, it's very lonely because they're afraid to talk to their boss.
Yes.
Because they don't want to seem like they can't do the job. Obviously, they want to do a good job, and so they don't want to seem like they're struggling. So they're having difficulty having a vulnerable conversation with their boss. Their employees are at a different level, so they can't commiserate with their individual employees.
That's right.
And so who do they talk to? And so often new managers have that, I'm navigating this by myself and I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know if I'm making a mistake, and all the other fears and anxieties that come along with that. They take on more work than they can handle. Often they're overworked, they're overscheduled, and they don't even realize it because they're holding on too tight.
Yes.
So the opportunity for them to network with peer level managers to say, here, what are you experiencing? How was it for you when you first got promoted? And getting those connections so they develop that support network with people who are either experiencing the same thing as them, or who have gone through it recently who can commiserate. Those are the sorts of things that I would recommend.
Awesome. So I want to talk to you about training in specific. So again, one of the issues I find with training, and this is through personal experience as well, and hearing other people complain about certain things. So you go through, let's say, leadership training. We went through the situational leadership training and all that jazz. They teach you something for 1 day, 2 days. The trainers come in for a day or two. First of all, it's very difficult to retain that kind of information in a short period of time. My issue is that how are they sustaining this training? Because it's like one and done, out, and then realistically, your manager above you should be coaching you throughout. And there's your baseline. And then how did you do, like, where are you at year after? So there's no gauge. So are we really setting people up for success? Because you cannot blame somebody when they just got in if they're not performing well. You can't just say they're a poor manager. What are you doing to help them?
You were speaking a lot of things that I'm familiar with. So when it comes to training in general, manager training or even just employee training runs the challenge of, that there is a drop off. If you're not using the skill, if you're not applying the information right away, even in the training session, the retention rate is abysmal at times. The ability to retain that learning goes down remarkably if it's not being applied. So you're right. One of the real problems, especially for when it comes to some new manager training, is that you go in, great, you do a workshop for 2 days, it's all wonderful, and no one talks about it ever again. Then yeah, that's not going anywhere. And that's a challenge with any kind of training, is how do you build that continuous learning and continuous reinforcement going forward? That's why it's really critical that the whole management team is understanding what is it we're trying to do.
That's right.
And that you don't just simply send your junior managers off to do the training. If you, at a higher level, say you're at a senior manager, director level, or even at the VP level, don't understand what are the issues, what are the things that you need to be dealing with, so that you can have those meaningful conversations that reinforce the learning that they're getting down at the lower levels. So it becomes really important that, it's that practice what you preach and lead by example. If you want somebody to apply some of these skills as new managers, you need to be demonstrating it. Even something as simple as, having a one-on-one with your employees. If you're a manager and you're not having a one-on-one with your employees because your boss doesn't have any one-on-ones with you, that's a problem. But if your boss is making sure that they spend time with you to make sure that you have development, that's demonstrating what you should be doing with your employees. So proper learning has to happen all the way through the organization, top down, to help support the next level down on what they need.
Culture.
Oh yeah, that's an aspect of culture, an aspect of the leadership culture that you can't have it stratified. There certainly will be differences between a frontline manager and what, say, a senior leader, executive level is going to be dealing with. Absolutely, but that frontline manager should be able to be supported by their boss, their director, 100%. And likewise, that director needs to be supported by their VP, and the VP needs to be supported by the executive. They should be supported all the way down, and there should be a common philosophy, like you say, a culture around this, so that you can have the influence happening across the entire organization.
Absolutely. No, that's great.
But that takes vision as well.
It does.
It takes the people at the higher levels of the organization have to value this, and they have to practice it. And if they're not doing it, there's no reason to believe that the next level below them is going to do the same.
Exactly. I call, a lot of stuff that's happening now, I call it busy management. The calendars are full from 9 to 5. You have no time to eat. How do you have time to coach somebody or have that one-on-one conversation? So there's a lot of work that needs to go in. And again, I think we should be setting up our younger leaders for success rather than teaching them that busy culture, right? Or busy management. Now, Matthew, you've been part of training for a long time. I think you've seen a lot of it throughout your career. I want you to look back to when you started and to where you are today. How is AI changing the game, or how is it going to change the game when it comes to training?
This is a very new area, and there's several things. One is a caution, one is an opportunity. The caution is around the nature of how the large language models work. These are based on countless kinds of messages and written messages and so forth, but it's ultimately a statistical model that tries to predict what the next thing should be said. So people relying on something like your ChatGPT or equivalent, they can get information out of it. They can get product out of it, but what they get out of it is going to be an average of whatever the data is in the system, the statistical average, which is fine. There's going to be a lot of interesting points in there, and there's going to be some good basic lessons, but often the lessons are going to be more obvious.
That's right.
The easier to get to answers. not going to be the ones that really capture or inspire. Sometimes when it comes to learning, it's more than just learning how to do something. It's in understanding why it's important.
Yes.
And reinforcing those messages and coming forth with real stories as to why this lesson is really important, and communicating a story related to that, a heartfelt, genuine story that a trainer can communicate, that a leader can communicate, to help the students learn the lesson. So the risk is that the content that might go into training populated with AI data might end up being less inspiring, less interesting, less engaging, and more conventional, which it's fine, but there's a risk there.
That's right.
The opportunity, and this is where I'm interested to see where the training space goes, is that you can potentially have an AI learn what you need personally, and so that you can engage an AI teaching bot, however this ultimately looks like, but we'll call it a bot. You can engage it, and it will know you, Rob, what you need, and will be able to answer the question in a way that you would understand. And that if you're like, okay, well, this is not interesting, it can engage you in a way that is personal to you. And then when I engage it, it'll be something different.
That's right.
It'll provide a personalized experience using language that I would understand and I would respond to. That's the opportunity, is to having this personalized learning, as opposed to everyone looks at the same PowerPoint presentation,
Yes.
everyone completes exactly the same words and have to memorize the same steps. That's fine if you're doing certain executable pieces, but if you're trying to do something like leadership development, that's an individualized experience. And what you need is different than what I need. So that's the opportunity. I'm excited to see what happens in that space.
So you're talking about more customizing it to the individual.
Yeah.
Interesting. I like that aspect.
We're not there yet.
We're not
but that's
there
the
yet.
potential. That's the potential.
Oh, it's going to go there pretty quickly, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So Matthew, you talked about onboarding, which is very interesting. Again, I think one of the topics that I wanted to ask you, because you've done a lot of recruitment yourself, and it's very important for organization to understand, is when they're bringing in a new employee, especially a new grad or a co-op or whatever it may be, what should the onboarding process look like in order for them to be set up for success, versus just throwing somebody in the corner and saying, okay, here's your computer, go, right?
And having worked at Hydro, I know that at different times the organization has struggled with the idea of onboarding. Some managers ended up being really successful at it, other managers not so much, and at times the human resources department didn't have the means to provide anything grand. What I would recommend when it comes to a proper onboarding process is making sure that the employee feels like they are seen from day one.
That's right.
So something as simple as welcoming them when they arrive, having somebody available to meet them personally, to say, hey, Rob, welcome. You're in the right place. Don't worry. We got you. You're good. Because the new employee is going to be nervous.
That's right.
They want to make a good impression. They don't want to get it wrong. And having somebody there who can say, don't worry, you're fine, is really important. Planning out that first day, planning out that first week, helping them come into the organization to say, okay, let's introduce you to your colleagues.
Yes.
Let's introduce you to some of the key people that you're going to work with. And don't worry, we use specialized language here with acronyms that you've never heard of before. Let's help you understand those, so you're not walking into a meeting lost.
Yes.
And of course, you do want to make sure they're set up with their technology, that they've got their computer, their phone, whatever they need, all of that is available, or that you're helping them get that set up. Even basic, hygiene stuff, like, is their desk set up for them? If they're getting a desk, is their desk set up for them? Has it been cleaned, or is it just piled full of papers and stuff left over from the last person who had it? Make a good impression. Let them feel like they belong here. This is their new home. Yeah. Make them feel like, hey, I was seen. I've got the right tools. I can now start doing that. And then plan out number of activities over that first week. Meetings, making sure that they have a tour of the facility, tour of any of the systems that they need to be using, and bringing them into any onboarding training that they need to complete, making sure that they're set up with that. And then also allowing them time to say, all right, we're going to give you a bit of time to sit down, and you can just kind of like look at your email, figure out where you are, look at your calendar. There's no structure, but just start getting into it, giving them time in the first few days to just get comfortable.
Some breathing space.
Yeah. And then the last thing I would say is making sure that you have them connect with the team more than just simply introduce them, but have a social aspect. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. Often, I would take a new employee out, take the team out for a lunch, for instance, on their first day, but it could be something as simple as, hey, let's all go for coffee. Whatever the organization does, but make sure that they have a chance to interact with their new colleagues in a less formal way, in a way that they can be like, okay, well, what do you do after work? Like, what do you, like, do you go on vacation? Where do you go? Like, tell me more about your family. A chance for them to start connecting as people and developing friendships.
Absolutely.
Because those connections, those social connections, are the things that are going to make for productive problem solving on the workplace kinds of relationships.
Exactly.
But you have to enable that. And as the leader, this is an opportunity for you to start crafting that.
Yep.
Plus, it's good for the team as well. It gives them an excuse to get together and socialize.
Absolutely.
And, that in itself is often a team building opportunity.
Well, those are great points, Matthew. And it was interesting. I was talking to somebody just yesterday, and believe it or not, they didn't get to meet their hiring manager after 6 weeks of being employed. They weren't even greeted when they started.
I don't even know what to say to that. That's astonishing. And if you're doing this out there, don't do that. Meet your employees.
Yes. And make sure you're there day one to greet them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Wow.
Yes. So awesome. We've come to almost the closing of our session.
Oh, this has gone by quick.
Yeah. So what I want to do, we've reached a segment where I called rapid fire questions.
Oh dear. Okay.
So I'm going to ask you some questions. So first thing that comes to mind,
we'll do it.
Just give me an answer. All right. So what is your advice to people who are starting off their HR careers?
If they're starting off with their HR career, recognize that there is a technical aspect, which is accurate, secure record keeping, but there's also a political dimension. You have to be mindful of what you say, because you're dealing with private information, and not everyone is privy to that. So you need to be diplomatic in how you communicate, not only amongst each other, but especially with the employees and the managers.
Know the policies.
Know the policies, but definitely, mind what you say.
Awesome. What is the one skill that leaders are lacking today?
Oh, gracious. I would say, what would be the one skill that would be lacking? I think the expectation piece, we come back to that again. I think really, setting expectations for employees becomes really important. It's so easy to just, barrel forward and say, just do this. Just don't ask me questions, just do this.
That's right.
Setting the expectations can lead to success. Take the time to set the context for your employees.
I love it. What's your best advice to young leaders out there?
Best advice would be have patience. Often we get into a place where we feel like we have to act. We have to be the one who knows the answers and, be decisive. And sure, yes, we need to be able to make decisions and we need to be decisive. But often that rushing forward to get to, action means we miss out on things. Be willing to slow down and listen, observe, make sure you as the leader are getting the right context or the right information so that you're making good decisions, not just fast decisions.
That's right. Awesome. What word describes Matthew best?
Oh, I would say patient.
Excellent.
There's so many words that fit different things, but I would say patient.
First to mind. Awesome. And where can people find you?
Easy place for people to find me is on LinkedIn, Matthew Devine. You can search for me, open to connecting that way. Otherwise, you could find my website. It's www.mdleadershipcoaching.com. But I'd say LinkedIn is the best way to contact me.
Excellent. So again, I want to thank you so much for being with me today and sharing your experience and great knowledge with the folks out there.
Oh, this has been wonderful. Thank you for having me, Rob. This has been a great conversation.
My pleasure. And for all those out there, thank you very much for joining us today. And if you've got any questions for Matthew, drop it in the question box below, or you know how to reach him. His contact information will be there as well on the podcast. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Have a great day. Bye.